Hello, Keyfest. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you've enjoyed the previous sessions earlier on privacy today. Our next session is going to be all about security, which goes hand in hand with privacy. And we're pleased to welcome our head of security, Ron Stoner, to talk about health checks and device maintenance. Ron is really a wealth of knowledge when it comes to security. He's been in the space for a long time, and he's very good at explaining a lot of these concepts into easy to understand takeaways. And so we're very pleased to welcome here, and we hope you enjoy the session. Ron, take it away.
Cool. Thank you, John, and thank you everyone for joining my workshop here at Keyfest. I hope everyone's enjoying the sessions that we've had so far with some of the amazing speakers and content and stuff that you've heard over the past couple days. I do want to note if you have any questions, please post those in the chat during the session. I may not get to them immediately, but I think at the end we'll do Q&A and follow up, and I'll try to get to many of those as I can. So as John said, my name is Ron Stoner, and I'm the head of security here at Casa. My job entails protecting our customers and their funds, providing secure architecture, advice, and review, and staying aware of the types of real-world attacks that can kind of happen when you're performing these key operations, such as signing or generating a private key, right? Very sensitive information. So I'm a hacker by trade, started very young, kind of messing around as a phone phreaker, which meant I was running around and playing in the phone system and testing around all of that stuff, and then moved over to computers, which means I really love to play around with and make devices do things that they're not originally intended to do. So it's a huge interest of mine. And I think that really speaks to what we're going to be talking about today. Today, we want to talk about health checks, device maintenance, and really how to perform OPSEC in the places where you're going to be using your hardware wallets and private keys. And I think this is really important as in the industry, because as an industry, we talk about a variety of different topics that are out there, security, privacy measures, but I don't see a lot of talks that talk about things about how to operate in a secure environment or how to ensure your devices are secure and operating correctly. You just heard me use that term OPSEC, O-P-S-E-C. And I want to take a second to kind of really define what that means. It stands for operational security. And by definition, it's a security and risk management process and strategy that classifies information. And then it also determines what's required to protect that sensitive information and prevent it from getting into the wrong hands. And this started right around the Vietnam War era when armed forces needed to protect their information and understand how is the enemy getting ahead of us? How are they getting our information? How can we protect it? How can we operate securely, OPSEC? So the short of it is really kind of thinking like an attacker and how they will try to attack you. So we're going to be using some OPSEC techniques here today to ensure that we are using our devices in a healthy and secure way. The first one we're going to start with is your signing environment, the environment that you're going to be doing these operations in. And the first thing we want to do before we even touch any of our hardware signing devices is, stand up. Even if you're at your desk right now and you want to do this, feel free. It's a great exercise. Stand up and take a look around at your physical environment, right? What are the devices in your room? Which windows are open? What cameras are looking at you? What microphones are listening? How many IoT devices and things of that nature, Internet of Things, the Amazon Alexas and the Googles and all of those of the world. How much of that stuff is sitting in your room and listening to you? If I look around my room right now, I can identify at least 4 microphones that I know of that are sitting actively listening to me. So these are the types of things that you want to consider when you're doing these things in an environment. So stand up right now, just take a lap around your room and look to see what electronic devices are there. I've done a lot of key signing and sensitive key generation ceremonies for single sig wallets, multi-sig wallets, a bunch of different schemas. And each time before I even touch a computer or device, I'm assessing the room for those things like the microphones and the cameras, and also anyone that may be in my general vicinity. It's a little bit of a paranoid step, but if you're dealing with a large amount of funds or life-changing money, you do want to take some of these steps and precautions to ensure that you're doing it correctly. Having said that, if you are at home, your risks are going to be a little bit different than if you're in the public. Consider the situation of signing a transaction or generating your seed at a coffee shop, right? There's a lot of patrons that are sitting around. It's a busy, hectic, noisy environment. The shop has cameras that are watching everything and recording all of that. If you're in an office situation and you're using your hardware wallet and you're generating keys or private keys, that office may have HD or 4K cameras that are watching the employees for security reasons. And as a security professional, I can tell you that some of those cameras are so good if you get into the HD and the 4K range that you can see the contents on a computer screen, or you can watch somebody typing in a password, or you can see what they're looking at on a mobile phone. So it's no different with a hardware device and a wallet. And a lot of those do come up and prompt you with seed words and things that you need to either retain or back up in certain configurations. So I want people to be aware of that. This even goes as far as the camera at the top of the laptop, your laptop computer. You know, some people put tablets sitting on the shelf with the charger that charges it overnight. And that is a camera that's facing you or looking into your room. What about the smart watch on your wrist? That's listening. That usually has a microphone or some sort of camera attached to it. And there are people, because I've seen this happen, where they're doing things on a hardware signing device where they're generating a private key and retaining the seed, and they physically or they audibly read out the seed words back to themselves when they're doing the confirmation, right? So if I have a microphone or I'm in the vicinity and I'm listening to you and I hear those seed words start flying, you know, that's interesting to me. That's going to be very interesting to an attacker as well, especially if they see that happening or hear that happening. So if I have the ability, the first thing I do is I really sweep the room, make sure all those items are powered off or physically removed. I've actually taken TVs and things off of the wall out of offices, disconnected them and left them outside while I was generating keys for very sensitive purposes. Some of the more paranoid security people and users will talk about things like bug detectors and do I need to sweep for all of that stuff? And they buy these expensive fancy detectors off the big box chain store. But I don't really advocate for that personally because one, you really need to know what you're doing with those things in order to make them effective. And two, with the amount of signals in the air today, it's really hard to discern false positives unless you have that technical nature and knowledge. So I think doing, doing some reasonable steps to remove some of those audible listening devices and visual recording devices is going to benefit you a little bit more than buying $1,000 bug detector and trying to sweep the entire room. A good environment for really doing these signing operations is one where you feel safe and secure so you can focus on the operation itself without having to worry about an attacker or somebody interrupting you. So if you're at home, you know, do a quick sweep and make sure you have some uninterrupted time. Close the door, do it after everybody's asleep so that people aren't going to be interrupting you because that's when we get lazy, that's when we get careless, and that's when we make mistakes. If you're at work, it's really better to find like a small little meeting room and then doing that sweep and disconnecting the Ethernet cable from a device or something if you have to, but be careful with that. I don't want you to get in trouble. Better yet, a lot of places have those isolation booths where you can go take phone calls and things like that. Go in there because they're very, very small. They're a little bit more secure than just doing it out in the open on a floor or a shared office space type of environment. And if you're public at a conference, you probably shouldn't be signing large amount of funds in public anyway. I would make sure you get somewhere safe or you're using like a wallet with a limited amount of funds. So if something does happen, you don't lose your entire stash. In order to sign, these hardware signing devices generally have to hook up to something, a computer, a mobile device, a tablet. And this is needed because it transmits the transaction data for the transaction that was signed by that device using a securely stored private key to perform a digital signature. By design, hardware signing devices, these hardware wallets were created with the mindset that it doesn't matter if the computer or the mobile device that you're hooked into is compromised or not, because all of these operations happen on that device itself, the signing device. But it's not 100% the case, really. We have seen instances of malware that can change details in transactions, such as the amounts, the destination addresses, or even the change addresses. And I just want to make a side note here. How many people are actually taking the time to verify the change address, that that's the correct amount of change and then that's where it's going back to? Because there have been attacks that have spoofed that stuff. And I've watched people when they're signing, they confirm the first output and the amounts, and then they just fly by the change address stuff thinking this is going to work, or this is just, I'm used to this is fine. So you want to be careful about those types of things. When it comes to the computer or the tablet itself, you want to keep that up to date really with the latest operating system and security patches prior to signing a transaction. And if you're on Mac OS X, you can find this in the software update button under About This Mac. You click Apple About This Mac and go to software update. And on Microsoft Windows, it's found in the Windows Update tool. And these patches and these notifications can get annoying over time, but they contain important security fixes that really help keep your computer and your tablet and your mobile devices relatively safe. If you have other software and security controls like anti-malware scanners, a little bit more granular firewalls that are prompting you that something's trying to connect in and out, or any other tools, those will generally help to increase the confidence level of your local system that nothing's going on, that it's not going to try to pull any malicious actions or modify any of this data in transit. After we've ensured that the system's updated, we want to ensure any software and binaries are updated as well. So a lot of people will use Electrum or they use Spectre for different wallets. And this is story time. This is a real world example. I knew someone whose job it was to process a large batch of Bitcoin transactions using a single signature hardware wallet. And they were doing this via the Electrum client. This was an operation they did like once a year. But the installation of Electrum, the binary that they had, was extremely old. So for those that are not aware, there was a security issue in Electrum where a notification could pop up in the software that contained information controlled by an attacker. An attacker ended up taking over that functionality and was able to post whatever they wanted in there. So this person updated their old copy of Electrum when they went to do their routine function, and they got the notification that said, there's a security bug, please update Electrum ASAP. So they clicked the link in the notification and downloaded it and installed it, not knowing that they just installed a malicious version of Electrum that compromised notification sent them to. And that was really the first failure, was number one, not keeping their software up to date and blindly installing a new version without performing any additional checks. And those checks can include things like going to the Electrum site manually, because you know the URL and you're typing it in, you're not clicking a link or following it, and downloading the update there, seeing if there actually is an updated version, right? Doing some confirmation. The other thing you can do is a lot of software providers will provide a digital signature where you can run some commands to check the file to make sure it wasn't modified in transit and that everything checks out with the size and the information contained in it. And that's using digital signatures. It's the same type of cryptography process. You can also do some hashing with some MD5 sums and things like that to ensure that your binary is the correct one, that executable is what it says it is. Now, that's not 100% foolproof either. We have seen some hackers compromise different companies and sign malicious software builds using the company's certificates or keys because they got access to them. But generally, that stuff's newsworthy when that happens, and you'll see things on the internet about that before you're generally affected. The second failure in this instance was due to human nature. And as humans, we're creatures of repetition. And we start to build up a confidence level the more we perform a repetitive action. This person, because this was a reoccurring task for them, felt confident, and they were a user in their personal life as well. So they were used to using hardware wallets and verifying and clicking the buttons. They felt confident enough that they performed that operation 100 times prior that they didn't think anything was going to go wrong on the 101st time. So that's exactly what happened. When they were signing, they weren't verifying the information that was popping up on the screen on the hardware device. And if they had, they would have seen that this malicious version of Electrum was basically making a transaction to send the Bitcoin to an attacker. So as they're sitting there clicking the button, doing the job, listening to music, they don't realize that now half of Bitcoin has been lost forever. So these are the steps. This is a real world example. And I reiterate that just to let people know that these things can happen and do happen. And it's generally a series of cascading failures that is going to occur when you don't expect it. With these two failures, we can see really how easy it is to lose your Bitcoin before you realize what has happened. My last point on actual computers and mobile devices and tablets themselves is that the question of air-gapped machines comes up all the time. And what I tell people is most users don't need to go that far. It's hard to air-gap a machine. It's hard to do it properly unless you know all the types of acoustic attacks and air-gap attacks or network attacks and things that can affect these machines that aren't air-gapped. So there's a level of technical knowledge you need. You need some engineering knowledge. You have to take things apart. If you've ever tried to take apart a MacBook Pro, you know how difficult that can be, and you know even more how difficult it can be to put it back together. And that's the process you need to do when you're air gapping machines. So I don't want to recommend that to the average user because I think it's a little bit more of an exercise in futility, but it is available for those that have a higher risk profile. And they are doing things where they're signing their transactions on air gapped machines that aren't connected to the network, and then taking the transaction and broadcasting it later on an internet connected machine. And if you're a user that has that high risk profile, that may be something that interests you. It's really dependent on the amount of funds that you're securing and your risk level, right? The risk level for a normal user is going to be different than, say, the risk level of a comptroller for a nation state. They're going to want to take different steps and security controls and mechanisms to protect those funds. But just to kind of sum all that up, properly air gapping a computer is hard. I don't recommend it unless you're super technical. If you are super technical and you're interested, please reach out to me and I can help assist you through that process to make sure you're doing that correctly. Let's go to the signing device itself. So just as we want to update the software and the operating system on our computers and our tablets and our mobile devices, we periodically want to update the firmware on our signing devices. And I caution this, unless you see that there's a firmware update or something out there due to a critical security vulnerability, I wouldn't recommend doing firmware updates as soon as they're available. If you've ever updated an Apple OS X computer with a firmware update the day it's available, more times than not, you see there's still remaining bugs or there's issues or stuff that needs to be ironed out. And there's usually another release a couple days later. And hardware signing device manufacturers are really good. I trust their level of coding. I trust their level of QA and process. But when you are dealing with something that's containing a large amount of funds and money, you do want to make sure that you're getting that level of comfortability. So for me, unless there's a huge security vulnerability out there, if there is, I'm going to apply that firmware fix. Otherwise, I'm going to wait a couple days and let some other people test it and make sure it's good to go. And then I'm going to go and apply that on my devices. We periodically want to update that because security is a constant cat and mouse game. And I think it's more so in the world of hardware signing devices due to the large size of the prize that's at stake. Firmware updates are generally going to contain important fixes and updates for things like better security of the firmware and the bootloader processes in the device, protections against prior known attacks from disclosures from institutions like Kraken Labs and different white hat hackers. And then also some protocol updates when we have new enhancements and features that are being activated on Bitcoin. Some of those are going to require firmware updates for these hardware devices in order to use those and take advantage of that. But you can find those firmware updates in the various software clients and websites for your signing device manufacturer. So if you haven't done that in some time, I would take a look. I know that if with the amount of security vulnerabilities and the criticality of them, if you haven't done this in like the past year, you should probably take some time to make sure the firmware is updated on all of your devices. As I said earlier, by design, those signing devices were created so you didn't need to trust the computer that it was interfacing with. As we said in the Electrum example, though, that's not necessarily the case, that there is malware and modified clients that will send the malicious transactions to your device in order to try to get you to sign. So one of the things I do want to highlight is even if you're doing these things in a secure environment, you still want to take the time to confirm all of the transaction details. And that includes the address, the amounts, and the change address and destinations. And that just ensures that the device that you have that's signing, that whatever it's connected to is not trying to trick or deceive you. There's also some extremely convincing modified USB cables that look identical to USB cables or chargers that are on the market from your favorite manufacturer. And in reality, the only difference in these cables is that they have a little tiny circuit board and chips built into the end of this. One of them is called the OMG, oh my God cable. And what this does is it's basically a computer, right? And they can contain payloads and different hacks and things that'll piggyback off your network connection, or they'll intercept USB packet data and change it, such as transaction information, or just perform general reconnaissance on you for an attacker. And I don't think that most users are going to be susceptible to this, but again, everybody's going to have different risk levels based off of your function and how many funds you're holding. these cables are very scary with the amount of technical deception that's being put out there. And some of these are even out in the wild where they've been misshipped to different manufacturers and things of that nature. So I want people to be aware of that. But it's one of the reasons we're really excited for some of the new QR code style signing and other enhancements to the address verification process that the industry more at large is looking at. When it comes to USB cables, it's really best to use the one that came in the original box with the device if you still had it from the manufacturer. When I was working on the Keep Key hardware wallet, we actually saw a lot of issues where people would use their own cables, their own USB cables at home. And because of manufacturing differences in the length of the cable and the wiring inside and the electromagnetic shielding, and even power fluctuations in the cable itself can cause issues and can really ultimately affect the life and the operation of your devices. So if you have it, I do recommend using those. Those manufacturers test these cables for all of the above and to ensure that they're not going to, statically charge the device or anything like that, send an electric shock, cause any problems with it. They're engineered to give you a degree of reliability. And on that last point with electrostatic shock, when you are handling your electronic devices and your signing devices, one step I also like to take is to ground myself to a piece of metal. So I will touch a doorknob or the chassis on a computer case or something that's metal to be able to statically discharge myself, because I don't want that going into my device. And while there should be shielding and things to prevent that from happening, we know that static charge can be the death of electronics in this industry. A good rule of thumb for security is that if someone has physical access to any of your signing devices, you really kind of want to consider that compromised. And in security, we've said that for computers, servers in a data center, but it really does apply to your hardware signing device as well, because there are known physical attacks that take advantage of engineering foresights in certain architectures and processes and chipsets, such as the STM32 CPU. When I store my hardware device, I'm keeping it in an access controlled location. And what I mean by that is a safe or a locked office or a locked drawer or something that I need a key or a PIN code or a badge or a way to authenticate myself or identify myself before I get access. And I actually like to go one step further in my own personal setup, because we get this question from people a lot. I don't have family members that I necessarily trust. I don't want to keep it in the family safe. I don't have a good place to put it because my roommate's a snoop. They like to go through all of my stuff. And if they see this, they're going to know I'm into crypto, those types of things. So keeping it in an access controlled location is good. But the next step I do is I actually use tamper-proof bags, these bags that you can store the device in, you can seal it, and you can label it. And you don't have to put necessarily what's on it, but you can date it. And when I go to retrieve my device, I have to open this bag and destroy it. And I do whatever I need to do, and then I rebag it. But because I've previously securely stored it, I can take a picture of this, I can write down the information, the number, or I can keep the slip, the receipt that comes with this, and compare it to say, is this the same bag? Has it been tampered with? Has it been accessed? If you are the nation state level attacker, that's your fear. I've even seen people do things where they take sparkly nail polish and they'll seal it. And what that sparkly nail polish does is it creates a very unique pattern where if somebody tries to hair dry or open the bag or rip it open and put it in another one and nail polish it, they're not going to be able to recreate that pattern. So if you've got a cell phone picture to look and compare, when you go to retrieve your device, not only are you retrieving it securely, but you're able to give yourself a level of confidence that nobody else has retrieved it either, or tried to access it, or tried to do anything with it. And this is really great for that evil maid type of situation you hear a lot about, of an insider attacker knowing the location of your device, or that you have one, or preventing access to that type of stuff, ensuring they're not getting access to that. It's not foolproof, but it is a way to provide detection and notification that that's happened. So now that we're practicing OPSEC, we've secured our environment, our computer or tablet or mobile device, and we've ensured we're in a safe location where we can focus on the operation we need to do. We can now perform what is, in my opinion, one of kind of the best features Casa has to offer, which is a signing device health check. And this is very important if you're a multi-signature user. Health checks in your Casa app are an easy way to verify your keys are available for signing transactions. and that the signing devices are working properly. It's a way to really test the integrity of your personal setup without actually needing to touch any of your funds or send any transactions with any amount of value. And you can health check any of your keys with Casa, and that includes your mobile key and the Casa recovery key. If you're on a mobile key or a single signature key, it's going to do one of two things, that health check. Well, it's actually going to do two things. I apologize. The first one is it's going to check to ensure that the key's on the phone, right? Is it there? Is it working? The second thing it's going to do is to ensure that it's properly backed up to your integrated cloud service in that encrypted fashion. And Casa cannot access any of that. Only your device can access that. But it's going to make sure it's there, and then it's going to make sure that backup's there. And if it detects any issues, it's going to alert you as a user that there is a problem with that mobile key. And this is great because you're getting that heads up awareness that there's something here I need to take a look at, or I need to take a step to resolve this before you need to go and move your funds in either an emergency situation or different market conditions or inheritance, or for whatever reason you're moving them. Actually, let's go ahead, let's do this together. We can run through a mobile health check. And while I'm not broadcasting, I am going to describe what I'm doing on my screen. We do have a blog post about this from our CEO, Nick Newman. And if you look for that on your favorite search engine, Casa Health Check, you should be able to find the blog post with the GIFs and the screenshots. But if you're a Casa customer, what you can do is you can go ahead and open your app right now and go ahead and authenticate, log into your account. And if you're using 2FA, you will have to go get one of your hardware devices and log in. But once you're in your Casa account, go ahead and tap that mobile key. And once you're in that mobile key menu, what you can do is simply tap Perform Health Check. It's going to come up and it's going to check the health of your mobile key on that device. And it's either going to say success or failure. The next thing it's going to do is going to ask you if you want to check the backup. That was the number 2 that I was talking about. So clicking that then goes out, looks for my backup, and says my backup was found. So now I have the confidence that my mobile key is secure on my mobile device, as well as backed up if I ever have any issues with this. So that's awesome right there. In one click, 15 seconds, we've now got a higher degree of confidence that one of our keys in our 2 of 3 or 3 of 5 key set is working properly. When you do a health check for your hardware devices, it's going to prompt you to connect it to your computer in order to create a digital signature. As I said, we're not moving funds. We're basically just signing a message with the private key that says, hey, I'm here, I'm working, and I'm ready to go. You'll need to access your hardware device. So if you're using multi-signature and you've got it in geographically dispersed locations, what I would suggest is request the hardware health check in the app. And then when you have time, go to your individual locations and perform your key operations on each one and do your firmware updates and do your general OPSEC reconnaissance to make sure nothing looks amiss. I don't recommend gathering all of your keys and taking them to one location and doing this all in one spot, because you've then centralized your risk. You're then putting all of your eggs in one basket. And if we want to do this securely, we're going to keep everything in its locations. We may take it away temporarily to perform this and bring it back, but we're never going to put them all together and centralize that risk. If you're using Cold Card, the process on Cold Card is a little bit different, where you load a text file on the SD card, and then you do all your operations and load it back to the computer. But it's still achievable. And as we're seeing these new devices come out and new methods and new paradigms of signing and QR codes, we're always looking at unique ways that we can increase the health check process. We recommend that you perform this action a minimum of every 6 months or so. I would do it once every 6 months. I'd actually do it once a quarter if it's physically possible. And it may not be depending on where you've put all your keys. But by doing this, what we've confirmed is, one, we know the location of and actually have access to and can successfully retrieve our signing devices, because there are going to be instances where maybe you're locked out, where the bank box was seized and you didn't know it, or the business is shut down, or there's all kinds of different scenarios where things can happen and you've got this confidence that my key is sitting there and maybe it actually isn't. So doing this health check actually helps confirm that and remove some of that doubt. Number 2, it confirms that our signing devices actually work and function and are operating correctly. And we're not going to go plug it in next time and it's just going to be all garbled or not power up. I've seen that happen. And it's unfortunate when somebody goes to plug in their hardware device and they've only got a single key and they didn't back up their seed, and it doesn't turn on. There's not much you can do in that instance. Number three, it confirms that our device is the correct one in our key set and that it contains the correct private key. It's very easy to mislabel things, or it's very easy to think that my office key is in this location when in reality it's over in this location. And then the last thing is we confirm that our hardware devices and our signing devices are going to be able to be used when we need to actually send a transaction. And that's when it's important. That's when it matters. That's why we're doing all of this prep work, because we want to make sure we're doing it securely, we're operating securely, and we're doing this in a healthy manner. If you are placing your keys in the in locations with the tamper-proof bags, you also confirm that no one else has accessed or attempted to modify your device. So it's great because it just gives us that additional level of control and verifiability. That's how I operate when I try to operate securely and I use my signing devices and perform key operations. I do want to open up the session now to any questions, chat, clarification, or ambiguity I can help clear up at this point. So the first question we have here is, do you recommend using Electrum on a verified Tail OS? And for those of you that are not aware, Tails is a self-contained operating system you can run on a device or a USB that contains Tor and a lot of other different security functionalities. It's stripped down and it's supposed to be secure. You can run Electrum on there. I've run it on a variety of different operating systems and things like that. But I think the more important thing that I want to iterate to people is you need to make sure you're running a verified and legitimate copy of Electrum. Because if you load a malicious version of Electrum onto an air-gapped computer and you're still doing air-gapped signing style transactions, it's not going to matter because it's going to be changing that stuff and acting maliciously. So I don't know that the OS matters as much as the actual binary itself and doing those verifications and those checks. Having said that, I do love Tails. I think running any type of security OS on top of what you're doing is just going to give you a little bit more benefit from using a Microsoft Windows or a Mac OS X computer that's connected to the internet 24/7. The second question we have is, I get worried doing firmware updates on hardware keys. Do I need to update them? When should I consider that? We talked about this a little bit earlier, and I definitely understand the trepidation and hesitation with performing that process. It's scary, right? And even the screens are a little scary to come up and say, make sure you have a backup and we're going to wipe it. And, 9 times out of 10, you're fine, but they're worried about the time you do the firmware update and you pull out the USB cable by accident. So what I like to tell people is the advice I gave earlier, if there's a critical security flaw, if you see that Trezor is posting an update because somebody can lift a private key off of it very easily or remotely or through a piece of software, you should probably check to make sure you're updating the firmware as soon as possible. It's something where I think from time to time, if there's not a critical security vulnerability update, I do like to update my firmware to ensure I'm staying up to date. There are sometimes updates to the Bitcoin protocol with fees and transactions and addresses and things you can do to take advantage to make stuff cheaper or to use new features and functionality. So that would be the other time that I would look to update that. But I have heard of people that are running old firmwares because they are worried about bricking the device, or they may not have proper backups of certain information and they're worried about wiping that. And what I would recommend to those people is get another device, make sure you're backing it up properly, rotate to another key set where you do have those things backed up, and then you don't have to worry about that issue as much. As I said, when you're updating your firmware, be very careful not to pull out the USB cable. Make sure you've got a good connection. Some of these hardware devices, you plug in the cable and it's extremely loose. And if you move it the wrong way or it tilts, the device resets because it's lost power because that connection's not very good. That's the type of stuff I would need to worry about when I was doing firmware updates. That's when you get into weird issues and the device can brick or stuff can happen. But I think go slow, read all of the screens, make sure you have the proper backups, and make sure you have a good reason for doing your firmware update, be it a critical security update or a new feature and functionality you're looking to take advantage of. How do you perform a health check on a device that might be stored in a faraway safe location? This is tough. There's not a great answer for this because it's going to be different for everybody. I have seen where customers store keys with family members in other states and across the country. And those family members may not be super technical, but what they'll do is they'll take time to sit on a phone call with them for 30 minutes or a screen sharing session or something similar to what we're doing now and walk them through the process just to say, go to the safe, retrieve it, plug it into your computer. Let's do this. I'm going to watch while you're doing the process to make sure nothing gets screwed up. That's if you can put that degree of trust in the person. If not, you do have to schedule and make sure that you can get access to that stuff and perform it yourself so you have that level of verification. Otherwise, there's not really a good way I know of to do a remote type of health check when it's locked up and powered off in a safe. I'm hopeful that with some newer devices, maybe that'll become a functionality, but then there's a connectivity issue there and with Faraday bags and things. I don't know, that starts to just get a little bit too cumbersome. Would best practices be to use a Faraday or burner phone at events at large Bitcoin conferences? Or am I just being too paranoid? Again, I think it depends on who you are. I don't know you. I don't know what secrets you know. I don't know what your job function is. For most people, I don't think you're at a bunch of risk if you're using phones and things like that as conferences. Faraday bags are great. Faraday bags are great for storing devices. But I don't know that we've seen that type of attack yet to quantify why you should be doing that, other than the Faraday bag is going to prevent electromagnetic static. If there is some sort of EMP attack and things like that, your devices will be relatively safe. There's a lot of benefit to doing it, but most of these devices are powered off or don't have batteries to begin with. So it's an extra layer of protection. When I go to conferences, yeah, I don't take my personal laptop. I'm not connecting to the Wi-Fi. If I do have to connect to something, I'm using my own VPN. I'm not hooking my phone up to public chargers. That's more of the risk, is getting things airdropped to you, hooking up the public chargers that are compromising your device because they're using these types of cables, or they've got a computer on the other end that's sending exploits to it. So I'd be careful with that. I'd be careful with public Wi-Fi access points. Those are the types of things where, if you're using my rogue or malicious access point, yes, I can send you the malicious version of Electrum when you go to click it if I detect that you're going to Electrum and trying to download that binary. It's hard to do that, but it's not necessarily impossible. But again, I don't know that I would just be targeting the random person at the conference. I'd probably be looking for the extremely vocal person that is being very flashy with their devices, because that's the low hanging fruit. I don't think the goal is to win the race, but it's just be faster than the next slowest runner. That's the person that's going to get taken down. What is the best way to know you're working with a verified copy of Electrum? This is a great question. We touched on this earlier. I don't click links for anything, ever. I don't like it. I type them in, and even though it's cumbersome and sometimes I have to search for the news article I'm looking for, if you text me or send me a link, I am not clicking it in any case whatsoever, because there's too many ways to deceive people. There's too much trickery. There's weird Unicode and Latin symbols and all kinds of things that can be done. And I think I even tweeted about this a little while. There's a malicious website, which is electrum.com, but the E has a very tiny dot over it, and it's only like 4 pixels wide. So if you didn't happen to notice that on your browser bar and I sent that link to you and you clicked it, you're now on the malicious Electrum website. So I always like to type things in manually because I know that I'm going there. I like to verify those links and everything. And then I download the binary, and usually next to the binary, next to that install link, it'll say something like signature file, or MD5 sum. And what you should do is you should Google on how to use GPG and different verification tools like MD5 sum, because when you download that binary, you can just run one command that'll compare the signature to the file, or it'll check the MD5 sum of the one you've downloaded to say, does this match the one that's posted on the website? And if it does, you know you've got the same copy, the one-to-one copy that they posted. If it doesn't, you know that something's going on. Either that's been modified in transit, you've got a malicious copy, maybe a hacker hacked Electrum and has put up their own copy and forgot to update the MD5 sum. And as I said, that's not 100% foolproof, but it is an additional layer and verification check that you can do to get a better degree of confidence, rather than just blindly installing an exe from a link that I send you. What's the temperature of hardware wallets that can be stored in so they can function? I think this is talking about safes and different temperate environments. And I don't know the actual temperature thresholds. I don't know that this has been publicized or tested at all, the information. I would treat them just like any other electronic device. I'd try to avoid humidity. I would try to avoid extremely hot temperatures. When we talked about this a little bit earlier in the week, when it comes to things like fire safes are only rated for certain temperatures and time. So if you're storing your devices in a fire safe, it's only going to delay or prevent a major fire. It's not going to stop the contents from the safe inside from heating up and melting. It's not going to stop the safe itself from melting if you have some enormous industry fire, chemical fire, some industrial fire, chemical fire, something like that with very, very high temperatures. I don't know that your hardware device is going to survive or function. And I think if you're using multi-signature and you're geographically dispersing those, you're mitigating that risk of one location being suspect to something like that. Somebody asked, why does Casa set a mobile key as a default instead of hardware wallets? I would say that a mobile key is much more vulnerable to things like loss or a broken phone. Um, that's a good question as well. And we actually offer, if you want to replace that type of stuff with another hardware device, you can do that in some cases. The mobile key is great because we are doing a backup of that. And if you have to move phones, we have export functionality where you can migrate over to a new phone on Android and iOS. So we've tried to build around all those types of use cases. But I think because it's easy and it's something that you have access to, whereas if you're making it all of them hardware wallets, they all are going to be in different locations. They're all going to be pinned where you need to remember a pin or retain a pin, and maybe you haven't done that correctly. Whereas your mobile phone is something you're going to be able to access a little bit easier and have access to, and it's on you at most times. Um, so I think again, it depends on your security use case and who you are and what you're trying to achieve with that. Oh, I love this question. My son wants to work in crypto security. This is a little bit different than our topic, but I want to field this one. Outside of hacking the mainframe, I love that. What experience will help him in his future career? Um, Crypto security is a very niche industry. I think the security and infosec, information security industry is very niche. Crypto even much more so, and crypto infosec is really, really at the end of the line there. Um, we're a very small community, but we're a very skilled and skilled and excited community, right? We're trying to do great things here. We're trying to build these products and sites and services and features for everybody so that they can use them securely and not get hacked. So what I would recommend is doing a little bit of a history lesson. Start with Mountain Docs. That was the biggest one that kind of happened, the biggest and first one. Read about the different exchanges, BTCE, and all the ones that were out there, and the things that happened to them, and the Bitfinexes of the world, and where those things went wrong. And that'll give you some idea because you start to see patterns where either funds are being stored in a hot wallet or it was an insider attack where there's different patterns that you can recognize. And when you start to see those patterns, it's very easy to start to see what controls could help alleviate those patterns and stop this from happening. The other thing I'll recommend is looking into some of the certifications that are out there. And this was a little bit more important, I think, when I was younger. We're seeing experience and kind of the things that you do in the real world being a little bit more applicable. But Security Plus and the OSCP and even the Certified Ethical Hacker, while it doesn't have the cloud it used to, it's a great introduction into the different tools and mindsets and methodologies. Start there and get your fundamentals, and then see how does that apply to Bitcoin and the cryptocurrency industry. Cool. I think that's all the time we have. I appreciate everybody's questions. Thank you for joining me here today. This is stuff that I love to talk about. If you have any more questions or you'd like me to clarify or deep dive on anything that we talked about today, please reach out to me at Forward Secrecy on Twitter. I'm more than happy to continue this conversation with you all. And make sure you're here for tomorrow's sessions. We have some more great content for you all. We're talking about great Bitcoin things this week, and I'm really happy to be a part of it. And I'm glad you're here too. Thank you, everybody.